And in keeping with dopamine, the most ubiquitous dopamine receptor, the most abundant in the human brain, is the D1 receptor. And lumateperone just got its approval 2 days ago, actually, by the FDA as an adjunct in MDD. I'll leave it to you, Chris, to go through this, but this is a drug that has effects on the most abundant serotonin receptor, 5-HT2A. It's got D1 modulation. It just changed its mechanism of action. It's now called the dopamine partial agonist.
Yeah, I'm very, very unhappy with that because it is a partial agonist, but presynaptically. It stimulates the brake. Therefore, it needs postsynaptic blockade at only 39% in a PET at the 42 milligrams that are used ubiquitously for schizophrenia, for bipolar depression, and for unipolar depression. So if we now call it a partial agonist, it looks like a postsynaptic partial agonist, ABC, aripiprazole, brexpiprazole, cariprazine. For those, you need 90 to 100% dopamine occupancy,
yes,
because otherwise you have too much dopamine floating around for psychosis, for example, for mania. So this is really confusing. So remember that lumateperone has a unique effect. Everything else is either pre- and postsynaptically a partial agonist or an antagonist. Here there's a dissociation. Partial agonism presynaptically, downtoning dopamine tone, only needing 39% postsynaptically. Therefore, lumateperone is the only atypical antipsychotic that does not have more side effects at a dose that treats schizophrenia in terms of mood disorder patients. Usually they have more akathisia, more EPS, and other side effects. So here we have a drug that's very forgiving because of that mechanism. And as you say, Roger, it also has D1 agonism, which then indirectly boosts ampakines, in addition to having an SSRI mechanism inbuilt at the same nanomolar concentration of affinity like for the dopamine receptor.
Well put. Again, D1 receptors are excitatory. They're located, among other areas, on the pyramidal glutamatergic containing neurons in the cortex, layer 5. So when you agonize them, you're stimulating them, you're releasing glutamate, which works through its orthodox receptors like NMDA and AMPA.
So in effect, we have now a polypharmacy in a drug here where we have an SSRI mechanism and we have a glutamatergic mechanism, and that may actually explain why we have some of these very high effect sizes that we're not really used to in depression. As you know, in meta-analyses, the main effect size is maybe 0.35 or so, but we here see a lot of 0.6s and even going, as you know, 0.2 is a fifth of the standard deviation, small effect size, 0.5, half a standard deviation is a medium effect size, but 0.8, 80% of a standard deviation difference between two treatments, that is robust. We rarely see that in medicine. And look here, we have a couple of outcomes where we have, with the CGI, for example, in patients with anxious distress who are harder to treat. We have 0.91, and the same is true for patients who had more failures. So obviously if you have had only one failure, then an SSRI alone can maybe do its trick, more time, slightly different pharmacology. But once you've established this ain't working, then lumateperone really had a very strong effect size, both for MADRS but also global illness, CGI. And when looking at the QIDS and the GAD-7, patients can confirm that these treatments' effects are real. There's very little in terms of side effects. Lumateperone can cause some nausea, some sedation, and some dry mouth, but particularly the sedation has to do with when you give it. Don't give it in the morning, as we did in our first trials with schizophrenia. Give it at night so people can sleep through.